Good morning and a good Yom Tov to everybody. I hope the first days of Yom Tov, the Sidarim and Chol Hamoed have been positive, uplifting, and meaningful for you. I would like to share some thoughts, reflections, and some ideas to consider and to ponder as we enter the last days of Yom Tov, Shvi Shal Pesach, Achron Shal Pesach, and the days which we celebrate, commemorate, and relive Kriyas Yam Sov. One of the particular challenges that I have been facing over Yom Tov is the mitzvah that we have to be b'simcha. There's a mitzvah of simchas Yom Tov. You should have a chag kosher v'sameach. There's a mitzvah to be b'simcha. But at the same time, when we open the newspaper and we read the reports and note and hear what's happening in the world around us, in the communities around us, you speak to people on the phone, there are great challenges that families, communities are facing, nationally and internationally. Just today, an organization called Links that works with Yisomim, orphans, noted that in the last 4 weeks, there are 40 new families, 40 new cases that they have of children without a parent, a father, or a mother. They've also noted that they have 211 new Yisomim, 211 new orphans that were not orphans only 4 weeks ago. Chaver Kadisha is busier than ever. The Bikur Cholim organizations are busy around the clock. The financial needs are growing by the day. There's so much tsar. There's so much avelus. There's so much kvura. There's so much misa that's surrounding us, be it on phone conversations, be it reading the newspaper and the email and the gamut of networks that we're reading. How are we able to be joyous? How are we able to get up and dance? How can we get up and sing? How can we say v'samachta b'chagecha v'hayisach sameach when we're surrounded by so many difficulties and so many challenges? A number of you have asked, have commented, and have noted that this is the first time that you will ever be reciting Yizkor b'yichidus on an individual basis. And that's hard. Over the years, you've never missed Yizkor in shul. Everybody makes a great effort to be in shul, to be surrounded by a tzibur, and to recite Yizkor in unison. And as a community in Yisya, that's not the case. And that's also a challenge. I would like in the next few moments in this message to try to share some thoughts about how to reconcile conflicting emotions, how to handle simcha on the one hand and avelus on the other hand. As we said in the Haggadah Shal Pesach, in the second course of wine that we go, me'evel Yom Tov. Avelus is an antonym to simcha. Joyous happiness is something which is absolutely polar opposite of avelus, of mourning. How do we handle, how do we reconcile those two emotions? Interestingly enough, to strengthen and to bolster this question, Yizkor itself is questionable. Of all of the days of the year, why do we decide to commemorate and to remember a lost loved one, Dafka and Yom Tov, the happiest day, the greatest day? We only recite Birchas Kohanim in the Golos on Musaf of Yom Tov because Musaf of Yom Tov is the most joyous time of the year. And even on Shachris of Yom Tov, we don't recite Birchas Kohanim. So Dafka now is when we're going to recite Yizkor to elicit a tear, to elicit emotional pain and suffering and recalling those loved ones. Why now in Yom Tov? Yizkor itself seems to be an antonym and seems to be a polar opposite of Yom Tov itself. Furthermore, there are other conflicting elements that exist during these days. As we enter the Mei HaSfira, the days of the Omer, the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos, of course, we commemorate the loss of Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. 12,000 pairs of students of Rabbi Akiva perished and died in a terrible plague. Shalom nagu kavod zeh b'zeh, as the Gemara says in Maseches Yevamos, daf samach beis on the beis. But on the other hand, the Ramban notes in his commentary to Parshas Emor that these days of Sfiras Omer are kichol shel moed. They're intermediary days between Pesach on the one hand and Shavuos on the other hand, bookends. Yitzias Mitzrayim to Kabbalas HaTorah is as joyous as the days in between Pesach first days and Pesach last days, Sukkot first days and Sukkot last days. So how could it be that these days of Sfiras HaOmer, which both have and carry an element of joy and simcha in terms of Sfiras HaOmer, also carry with it an element of mourning, of avelus on the one hand, of misas Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, and on the other hand, kicholo shamoid, as the Ramban understands. How do we reconcile, how do we understand these two polar opposites, these two conflicting emotions, avelus versus Yom Tov? I think the answer to this question lies in two psukim, one of which we read in the Haftarah of Achron Shal Pesach on day 8. The pasuk reads in Yeshaya, Oducha Hashem ki anaftabi. We praise you, we thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for rebuking me. And that also seems to be an oxymoron. How can we praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving us terrible pain and suffering, for being difficult, for a nafta. And there's another pasuk also that's a well-known pasuk, a pasuk in Mishle, Yoser Tov laleches el beis ha'evel, milaleches el beis ha'mishta. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a joyous home. Ki achai yiten el libo, human being will put and take the emotions and the seriousness and the avelos to heart more than the simcha. What I believe these two psukim are exemplifying is that simcha is ephemeral. Simcha is temporary. There's a great joy at the moment of a wedding. There's a great joy in Yom Tov, the 7 days or 8 days. But Avelos is something which is transformative. Avelos changes a human being. You've ever met someone who never went to shul and starts going to shul after the loss of a loved one, says Kaddish for 11 months, learns Mishnayos over those months. They're a changed person. They'll want to come back to shul. They have a hard time leaving shul. Avelos changes a human being forever. I'm not. And that person is never the same as they were pre-Avelos as they are post-Avelos. Simcha comes and simcha goes, and it's hard to hold onto it and to grab it. What I believe Chazal are doing during the Yemei HaOmer, when they take the days of Kecholo Shalmoi, the 49 most exciting, beautiful days when we're climbing from Yitzias Mitzrayim to Matan Torah, is saying, don't just grab the Simcha of Kriyas Yamsov. You just split the sea. You just experienced the Aseres HaMakos. You saw Makos Bechoros with your own eyes. You're on the way to Matan Torah, the most exciting day, the most exciting period in Jewish history. That could come and that could go. Dafka now, the Misas Talmidi Rebbe Kiva ben Pesach Latzeres was chosen in order to grab the moment and in order to concretize it and to feel it and to live with it. Don't just allow these 49 days that take us from Yitzias Mitzrayim to Matan Torah just to go by. We count them and we build up, but at the same time, if we recognize the avelos, the loss of the Talmidei Rebbe Akiva Shlonagu Kavod Zeh Bezeh, we'll be able to take advantage of these days of Sfiras Omer more and grab Kabbalah Torah in an even more powerful way. The same thing is true with the recitation of Yizkor and Yom Tov. It's Dafka and Yom Tov as we're leaving Yom Tov. On 8 days, on the 8th day of Pesach, when we could just simply, Pesach comes and Pesach goes. But how are we going to hold on to it? The way we hold on to it is being maskir, by recognizing the loss of a loved one, of those who are closest to it. And if on that day 8 we're able to tap in, to connect to the neshama of that we are being maskir, we are being mala the simcha of Yontif and concretizing the simcha of Yontif in a different way. Because we're going to leave Yontif a different person, a different human being, and it's going to change the entire atmosphere and change the entire Yontif experience that we had. I would imagine that most of the people who are being maskir, ancestors, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, lived through very, very difficult times in Jewish history. Never ever did they have situations, and did we find ourselves in situations that they were. I think maybe now for the first time we can say that we have an inkling of how ancestors dealt with struggles, with difficulties, and in no way can we compare our struggles with their struggles, at least most of them, and it pales in comparison. But if we are able to take advantage of the challenges that we're finding now, if we're living through this period and grabbing it and taking advantage of the opportunities that we have now, and we live with them and we build them up, then that person is able to take and tap into the neshama, be maskir the neshama in the most powerful and productive ways. And we could tell that ancestor that just like you lived through hard times, just like you lived through challenging times, and were able to be a stronger Jew and a better Jew and a more committed Jew, we too will emerge. And thus, that's the greatest way and the most powerful way that we could be maskir a loved one, is be recognizing that challenge that they had, noting that we are living in a challenge and a trying time, and using this opportunity to be mala, to be maskir them, and say we can do it too. Pesach is a Yom Tov of questions. We have the Dalakushis, of course, and much of the dialogue in the Pesach Seder is through Sheila and Tshuva, through questions and answers. It's been suggested before that one of the questions that we ask at the Seder, which is most difficult, is the paragraph of Dayenu. And there, Dayenu, we say that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if He took us out of Egypt and didn't bring us to Matan Torah, Dayenu. If he would have brought us to Har Sinai, didn't give us the Torah, Dayenu would have been enough. If he would have brought us to Matan Torah, didn't bring us into Eretz Yisrael, Dayenu, that would have been enough. And of course, why Dayenu? How would that have been enough to go to Har Sinai and not accept the Torah? How would it have been enough to go to the cusp of entering the end of Eretz Yisrael and not enter? How would that have been enough? Some have suggested that Dayenu is not a statement, but rather it's a question. Dayenu? Would we have been satisfied if we would have went to Matan Torah and not received the Torah? Would it be unsatisfied if we left Mitzrayim and weren't able to leave Mitzrayim? Would it be unsatisfied if we would have entered Eretz Yisrael and wouldn't have been able to accomplish the mitzvahs? Dayenu, would that have been enough? One of the greatest questions and challenges that a human being has is asking questions and not having an answer to a question. That's a very difficult, painful process. And when individuals ask themselves questions that they can't answer, that question is so painful and difficult trying. But the simcha, the joy of answering a question, is extraordinarily powerful and is very, very, very strong. As Chazal note, in simcha ke'ataras asfekos, there's no joy like answering a question. The avelos kaviyachol is the question. The simcha is the answer. Let's use this holiday of questions to ask ourselves questions. Are we doing enough? Are we helping out enough? Are we learning enough? Are we davening good enough? Are we thinking about the challenges and the people around us? And if we're able to do that, we'll be able to live with this conflict of simcha and avelos. That on the one hand, we're able to live through the suffering and the trials and tribulations that so many are suffering. But if we're able to recognize that within the avelos, there's so much to tap into, there's so much to use as a catalyst of growth, that in and of itself can be an awesome opportunity to grab hold of something and become transformative, to change ourselves, to become different people. And that on a certain level is a Yom Tov in and of itself. Thus, there is no conflict between celebrating Chol HaMoed, between Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah during these 49 days, and at the same time celebrating, commemorating Nisas Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. Avelos and Yom Tov can work together if we're able to grab hold of the message and the lesson of the Avelos. There's no stira, there's no conflict between celebrating and reciting Yizkor, the sad commemoration and the loss of a loved one, and shedding a tear on Yom Tov when it's such a joyous occasion, because if we grab hold and we tap into the neshama of the deceased, we're able to pass that on to the next generation and use that as an everlasting teaching to generations. And no longer is the simcha ephemeral, but the simcha is transformative and long-lasting. And thus a question which is not answered and unresolved can be answered and can be resolved, and that is the simcha of Yom Tov itself. May we tap into the joy of Yom Tov, the simcha of Yom Tov, and use it as an opportunity to be able to root in the deepest elements of who we are and what we're about, to understand and to appreciate the days that we have. And if we're able to appreciate these challenges and the difficulties that so many are having, and use it as an opportunity to change and to transform, then that in and of itself is a Yom Tov. It's interesting to note that dafka at simchas, at a chasana, that's when we break a glass, and that's when we remember Churban Yerushalayim. It's dafka at a great and festive meal where we leave a piece or a dish off, or a great food from the table, a delicacy off. Why dafka in a simcha do we have elements of avelos? Again, it's the very same point. Simcha is something which is ephemeral. But if we're able to tap into something which is transformative, and use the simcha to be able to recognize the loss of the Beis HaMikdash, there's no greater time to recognize Churban than specifically at a time of simcha. There's no greater time to remember a loved one than dafka b'mei simcha. There's no greater time to recognize the loss of Talmidei Rabbi Akiva except during Yemei HaOmer. And thus, that's how we should contemplate, think, and enter Yom Shvi Shel Pesach, Achron Shel Pesach, noting, recognizing, honing in, and concretizing the great simcha that we're part of, the Yetzias Mitzrayim, climbing to Matan Torah, and using the challenges, the trials, and the tribulations to be able to focus, to grab hold, and to root in many of those points which we were able to do. I hope we could take advantage of these days, tap into the unique nature of Yemei HaOmer, into the special day of Shvi Shel Pesach, Achron Shel Pesach, and be able to be maskir those neshamos and use it as an opportunity to take hold of some very important aspects of the Yom Tov of Pesach. I wish you, your families, a good Gebench Yom Tov, a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and hope everybody's doing just great. Be well.